Hello, good afternoon. We had a meeting with the congressional delegation this morning to go over the supplemental appropriation request that we've been putting together. The majority of the congressional delegation came. I thought it was a very productive meeting. We also had the county executives and Mayor Bloomberg, County Executive Ed Mangano from Nassau, County Executive Steve Ballone from Suffolk, County Executive Rob Astorino from Westchester, and Mayor Bloomberg, who obviously represent the geographic region that was most affected here. And as I said, the majority of the congressional delegation. The supplemental appropriation, I believe, is going to be critical for us. This region, this state, has suffered mightily, and we're going to need federal assistance to bring the state back, to bring these communities back. And I think that's going to be essential for our progress. We went through a number of numbers and facts that I think really put Hurricane Sandy in focus, and I'd like to go through a few of them with you quickly. And these numbers are evolving as we give more information. 265,000 private sector businesses were affected, 22 million square feet in Manhattan. You don't often hear about this. There was a tremendous loss of commercial property, valuable commercial property, much of it in downtown Manhattan. Could be another month before some of those buildings come back online. That's a lot of jobs. That's a lot of economic loss for the state. 46,000 unemployment claims the first week after Hurricane Sandy. That's on a base of about 840,000 claims. What is the economic impact of those claims? When are those people going back to work? What happened to those businesses? 228,000 people have registered with FEMA thus far. We expect that number will go up also. 300,000 homes sustained damage. Transit system you know about, and the 8 million people that it serves, 2,000 miles of damaged roads, 11 tunnels flooded, 2 million residents without power. There is an historical context for supplementals. This is not a unique or novel situation. When I was at the Department of Housing and Urban Development for 8 years, we administered supplemental appropriations for disasters. When you look at the list of recent disasters, Hurricane Katrina obviously tops the list for money appropriated, $146 billion. Then, second is Hurricane Sandy. We're still estimating, but 50+ billion. And then you see the number of hurricanes that go back to about 1992, all of which had supplemental appropriations, and all of which were less devastating and less impactful than Hurricane Sandy. So if the first question is, well, should the Congress pass a supplemental? Does this merit a supplemental compared to past activities? It clearly does by the Congress's past activity and just on the merits. This is probably the most revealing chart, I believe. Hurricane Katrina, which is the obvious comparison, in many ways was not as impactful as Hurricane Sandy, believe it or not. When you look at the number of housing units damaged or destroyed, 305,000 in New York, 214,000 in Hurricane Katrina. Power outages, 2 million versus 800,000 in Katrina. Businesses impacted, 265,000 versus 18,000. Hurricane Katrina got a lot of notoriety for the way government handled or mishandled, depending on your point of view, the situation. But when you look at the damage done, the economic damage, the housing damage, the damage to commercial properties, because of the density of New York, the number of people affected, the number of properties affected, was much larger in Hurricane Sandy than in Hurricane Katrina. And that puts this entire conversation, I believe, in focus. We have put together an extensive list and itemization of what it's going to take to rebuild New York. We divided it into two basic pots. One is the recovery effort, and second is a prevention mitigation effort. Recovery means just replacing that which was, just repairing the housing, the businesses, to get them back to where they were, without really an emphasis on prevention or mitigation. Prevention mitigation, obviously, is what can we do to make sure that this doesn't happen again or lessen the impact if it does happen. We also worked with the other localities to come up with a united plan and a united presentation. In other words, the City of New York, Mayor Bloomberg, Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Rockland, we're all talking the same language, the same terms. We've agreed basically to apples and to oranges. When you look at the breakdown in terms of numbers, our recovery cost is about $32 billion. Originally, we had estimated it to be about 30, so it's right about where we thought it would be. A prevention and mitigation package of about $9 billion for a total recovery of $41 billion. The breakdown, $15 billion for New York City, $6 billion Nassau County, $1.7 Suffolk County, and then Westchester, Rockland, the other counties, and the utility cost, you can see, drops off. This includes the cost that FEMA would normally reimburse, because FEMA needs a supplemental appropriation to fund this storm, because it would deplete their accounts. So even the FEMA reimbursement requires a supplemental. With that, let me turn it over to Howard Glazer, who will go through some more numbers on local government's cost.
Thank you, Governor. As the Governor mentioned, we work very closely with the city and the localities to put together the damage estimates. We also work with outside financial advisors, including PricewaterhouseCoopers and Public Finance Management, PFM, the PFM group, and their review of these estimates indicates these are probably conservative in nature and may grow in time, as you saw the Katrina numbers do. So the cut the Governor just showed you was by jurisdiction. This is a snapshot by category of damage and loss. And I won't spend a lot of time on each one, but we can provide you additional background if you would like. I'll just quickly run through government response at $1.6 billion. This represents the cost to local governments and the state government of their storm response. What's included in here? It's things like, for New York State, the National Guard deployment. It includes debris removal contracts. It includes the costs of pumping out subway and highway tunnels. That's what was done immediately previous to, during, and after the storm in terms of the government expenditures. Individual assistance, $900 million. That is the amount of money projected under the FEMA plan that allows individuals to receive a partial benefit for their loss. To date, FEMA has already received almost 230,000 applications for assistance, and FEMA has dispersed over $550 million. Based on their numbers and the projections that we've gone through with them, we believe that number will climb to at least $900 million in individual assistance. Housing is a very large number, as you see, of $9.6 billion. This is what we believe is the uninsured portion of housing damage. To date, we know the following. There are 300,000 claims already made to private insurers for housing damage. 50,000 of those are flood damage, which tend to be the most expensive damage. It's an expensive housing market, so any repair of damage is fairly expensive. We can walk you through how those numbers break out. But that number, to put it in perspective, CoreLogic, which is a real estate metrics company, estimated a storm surge damage potential of hitting 281,000 homes very seriously with potential of $111 billion in total insured and uninsured. So our numbers here are fairly conservative in the amount of damage uninsured that we're projecting. Business impact similarly is composed of two components. One is physical damage to business. That's loss of inventory. Physical damage to commercial structures. That's about $1 billion. On top of that is business interruption. You had almost every business operation in New York, metropolitan New York, shuttered their doors for a period of 5 to 10 days, depending on where they were. That's about 250,000 businesses in the impacted areas, lost wages, lost productivity. That's reflected in about a $5 billion figure. Again, that's a very conservative number according to every kind of economic modeling. Health includes the cost of both municipal and public hospitals as well as private hospitals like NYU Langone. Schools cost is primarily a City of New York cost that's provided by them, incorporating damage to schools. Very big number for transit, roads, and bridges. The big piece there is the MTA. MTA, almost $5 billion in damage to the MTA system, about $4.8 billion. That's damage to the tunnels, to the rails system, to the subway system. This amount of money, the 4.8, would just restore it to where it was before the storm. The signal systems in many of the tunnels have to be completely replaced, for example, and that's a lot of money. The additional money within transit, roads, and bridges is primarily highway damage. Things like Ocean Parkway out on the Long Island barrier beaches is about $100 million, and other local roads are included in that as well. Environment covers a number of different things. It includes the barrier beaches. That's restoration of barrier beaches all throughout the region. It also includes significant damage to wastewater and water treatment plants on Long Island and elsewhere. Utility costs, that's damage to utility systems, and government operation revenue. These are estimates of lost revenues to the government, to all the local governments and the state government as a result of that business interruption that occurred during that period of time. And that's how we get to the total of $32 billion, and we can certainly walk that through in more detail on an individual basis as well. We have behind this the similar kinds of breakdowns for each locality. I won't go through these now, but this gives you an example. This is the New York City number. So 15 billion of the 32 billion is New York City jurisdiction. The remainder, about 6 billion, is Nassau County, almost 2 billion, Suffolk County, and then state and local costs beyond that.
Thank you. The caution that we advise the delegation, this morning I would advise you, this is a situation that I believe will continue to unfold. We talked about the comparison to Katrina and how this was actually more impactful. The total dollars in Katrina were the subject of about 6 separate appropriations. So as time went on, they found more and more damage, which is normally the way these things tend to unfold. We did the best we could to come up with a snapshot of the damage now, which is what the 32 billion represents. I would expect as time goes on, you'll be informed of more and more damage that has actually been done, or the consequential damage that was created. You have a community that was devastated and businesses closed, and over the coming months, you'll see that play out. It was a good conversation with the delegation. I understand the fiscal pressures that Washington is under. I understand the political pressure that they're under. I also understand the fiscal pressure that New York is under. And I know that the taxpayers of New York cannot shoulder this burden, and I don't think it's fair to ask them to shoulder this burden. This nation has a long history, as you saw in the other supplementals, of helping each other when at a time of need. And this state and this region of the country have always been there to support other regions of the country when they needed help. Well, we need help today. We pledged to work in a bipartisan way. Congressman Peter King was there. Congressman Michael Grimm. Getting this passed in the House is going to be important. Getting this passed with Republican support is going to be necessary if it's going to happen. I had spoken to the congressman over the weekend. I've known Congressman Peter King for many years, and he pledged to be helpful, as did Congressman Michael Grimm. So we have a joint process that we're working on. We're also talking to New Jersey and working with them. So whatever winds up the ultimate point of the New Jersey deliberations, we look forward to working with them in a united force when we go to Washington. And we are cautiously optimistic. Again, this is the beginning point, and it's going to be a long road, but it's the next step for us to take is now to acquire the necessary funds to do the reconstruction that we anticipate. Questions?
Governor, do you have a revised regional figure? I know initially you had said about 50 billion. Will you be working, you mentioned New Jersey, but will you be working with Connecticut and New Jersey in terms of coming up with an overall regional figure?
Mozart, we said we have 32 billion for New York. I believe the New Jersey initial estimate was about 30 billion. So you're looking at about 62, 61 billion dollars between New York and New Jersey. Connecticut is much smaller.
Governor, Congressman King told us when asked about how Speaker Boehner was really basically looking forward to basically fighting those funds, that Speaker Boehner said one way or another, New York will get the money it needs, even if that means borrowing. Have you talked to the Congressman about this, and are you planning to talk to the Speaker?
I spoke to Congressman King this morning. As I said, I spoke to the Congressman over the weekend. Congressman Grimm was also there, and they're going to be on the Republican House side. Obviously, they're the members who can be most influential. He said he's had good conversations thus far. I said whatever he wants us to do, however he thinks we should deploy, we will. I said to the Congressman, if you want to invite the Speaker to come up and tour the damaged areas, that would be our pleasure. If you want me to go down and talk to the Speaker about it. However, we can communicate our case and the facts. That's what I want to do. And obviously, I'll leave it to Congressman King and Congressman Grimm to tell us how best to do that. It's their house. It's their party. But whatever it takes, I'm willing to do.
Governor, what's it that 9 points, some odd billion is for the mitigation? What do you see that with?
Well, there are two parts to this, right? Part of it is you need to recover. You need to restore. You need to rebuild. You need to replace the damage. Second part of the exercise is if you're doing this type of work, shouldn't you also be coming up with measures that will prevent this from happening again or mitigate it if it did happen again? And that is what's called prevention and mitigation. During Katrina, this was a very big part of the exercise that they went through. It's common sense. It's intelligent. Rather than sustain another $30 billion in damage, which again, this is just the starting number, and this is actual recovery work, but rather than a $30 billion damage next time, why don't you spend some money now to save money in the future? And that's what prevention mitigation is.
Governor, if it's not fair to ask New Yorkers now to pay more in taxes for these recovery aids, when is it fair to ask some New Yorkers to pay more in a time of need?
Roger, we have a long history of, let's go back to the side with all the other disasters. We have a history of practice in this country when a region has a devastating loss, especially by an act of nature, that the federal government is there to be of assistance to that region, that state that was hurt. Hurricane Katrina is what everybody remembers. But Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Ike, Hurricane Wilbur, a whole alphabet soup, right? A whole family of hurricanes have hit this country over the past years. There have been storms also. There have been floods also. And what the federal government has done is they've gone to the Congress and they said this region has been badly hit. They're suffering the consequence of the loss. You can't ask that region to now finance that recovery because the region has been disabled to some extent. And the country has come together and said we need that region of the country to function, and we'll invest and help that region of the country. That's the concept of the collective of the government, right? And that's what this country has done time and time and time and time again. So, Hurricane Sandy, is it the type of activity that the federal government normally reimburses for? Yes. Look at the past. That's what this chart tells you. Well, compared to past storms, how bad is it? Very, very, very bad. Number two, probably on the initial estimate of damages, but when you look at the number of homes and businesses affected, this storm affected many, many more people and places than Katrina. And arguably, therefore, this created more housing and economic damage than Katrina. Now, Katrina had a human toll that thankfully we have not paid in this region. And Katrina was a different story of government involvement and government action. But just in terms of impact, at the end of the day, I think you're going to have a very strong case on the numbers that Hurricane Sandy was more impactful from a specific housing economic development point of view than Hurricane Katrina. So this is what the federal government normally does. On the merits, this is justified. If anything, the initial estimate of this damage, I think, will grow over time. And it's a realistic / conservative estimate at this time.
But there are some New Yorkers who are very low off, high income earners. Some people who are paying a slightly higher income tax rate than previously after the adjustment was made and the tax sunsetted. Why not ask them to contribute something a little bit more as the rest of the country and their tax rates contributes in your favor?
$40 billion would, to try to finance that through taxes, would incapacitate the state. We don't know at this time. We started with about $1 billion deficit. Ozzy, just look at the numbers you're talking about. We have $1 billion deficit, and we know what it's like to close $1 billion deficit, right? A lot of heartburn. We closed a $10 billion deficit, which was all the money in the world. This is $40 billion. I mean, you couldn't even come close to handling this on a state level. That's why you go to the federal government. No, we'll have a mid-year report that's coming out soon. The mid-year report will show that we're basically on track in terms of collections and budget projections. But the mid-year report was done just before the storm, so we don't really know what the effect of the storm is on the collections. We'll find that out probably later in December. Also, you need to know, once you have that number and what it did to revenues and collections, then you need to know whether or not you're getting the supplemental. And I would hope to have some answer on that in the relative near future. I believe, from our point of view, the funding is important, and the sooner we get the money, the better. I also believe that, from a political point of view, the nation watched New York, New Jersey, Connecticut go through this hardship, and I think they understand it. And while the case is fresh in their mind, I think it should be presented, and that's one of the reasons we're moving as aggressively as we are. Laura? Laura, I said to Congressman King, I will do whatever he thinks is helpful. Obviously, you have to get this passed in the Senate and in the House. If people anticipate if there are going to be issues, there'll be more issues in the House. So I said to Congressman King, if it helps for me to come down to speak to the Speaker, I will.
One more. Desmond.
Governor, are you ruling out any sort of tax increases or revenue
Tax increases, my philosophy hasn't changed. Tax increases are always the last resort. This is less than a wish list. I have a wish list too. Nobody's asked to see it, so. There is a mitigation prevention budget of about $9 billion, much of which would be towards the MTA. You know, we have 3 commissions that are working on these issues because they're complicated. But one thing we know for sure, within Manhattan, the flooding of the underground infrastructure is a major liability, and it disables the region. So, as we all saw with the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, with the subway tunnels, how do you keep the water out in the first place? How do you keep it out of the tunnels? How do you keep it out of the subway system? Some parts of Manhattan, the underground infrastructure goes down 15 stories. You don't have the capacity to pump out 15 stories of infrastructure. So prudence says make sure the water doesn't flood it in the first place. Because you want to disable a region, that does it. You disable the MTA, you disable the region. You disable the fuel delivery system, you disable the region. You disable the cell phone system, you disable the region. So these are the kinds of things we're looking at in prevention and mitigation.
Thank you, guys.
We'll take one more. You have a question? The mayor is going to lobby Washington. County Executive Mangano is going to lobby Washington. Steve Ballone, County Executive Astorino from Westchester. They all have different friends and people and parties that they know in Washington. So whatever they can do, however they can do it, great. We're all working to the same goal. We have a unified plan, which I very much appreciate their cooperation. Many times you'd have individual plans. Nassau would do their plan, Suffolk would do their plan, New York City would do their own plan, Westchester. This is a unified plan. We all work together. We all have one goal. However we can get it passed, great. Whatever the mayor can do, great. Whatever the county executives can do, great. I said if it's useful for me to go down, I will go down, but I'll wait on that judgment for the advice of Peter King on the House side primarily. You know, we need the financing. When sooner is always better. My message to the administration and to the Congress was we appreciated the emotional support that we've been shown, and we have been shown great emotional support. We need financial support, and we need it sooner rather than later, and that's our message. Thanks, guys.